All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're very excited to have you joining Candid Conversations. Really grateful for the partnership here between Public Narrative and Together We Heal. My name is Candace Moore. I'm the Chief Equity Officer here in the Office of the Mayor, representing the Office of Equity and Racial Justice. And Together We Heal is an initiative that my office is leading to really support Chicago, the mayor's office, in really sort of advancing this journey toward healing that we so desperately need. Candid Conversations is a series of conversations that we will be sharing with you all over the next 4 weeks. Tonight's conversation is focused on the healers. And I am so grateful to have 4 folks with us who are going to share in an important conversation around what is healing, what is racial healing. I definitely want to, before we get started, thank Public Narrative, thank Jamira, the leader of Public Narrative, for all of their work. And I definitely want to thank all of our panelists for joining us tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And I will actually start a prompt going with the panelists. I will leave you with, if you can introduce yourself and also share your favorite Chicago memory to kick us off. And I'm going to pass the mic first to Saida.
Thank you, Candace, for having us and inviting me to be a part of this. I'm so honored. So my name is Saida Segovia Taylor. I'm the founder and executive director of Organic Oneness, which is a grassroots social justice organization that co-creates with communities to mobilize systemic change, healing, and wellness, foregrounding Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's a Baha'i-inspired organization, and we've been doing work now for quite some time, but just became tax exempt so last year. So we're excited. My favorite Chicago memory. Let's see. So I have many, but one that is dear to my heart is when Bronzeville organizations came together and brought Dr. Joy DeGruy to Chicago for the first time for the Healing conferences, because that just propelled this movement that continued and even kind of birthed Organic Oneness. So that is a good one. I won't say the rest because I'm sure you all will probably say what's on my list. So I wanna choose. Let's see. I'll go with Obari. Is that how you say it? Dr. Cartman?
Obari is fine, and that is right. Nice to meet you, Saida.
Saida, yeah.
Saida, nice to meet you, Saida, and all of you. I'm excited about this. I love the no moderator version of this because I want to talk to y'all anyway. I really just wanted to get to know who y'all are and what your work is about. Obari Cartman, Program Director of Real Men Charities, and also the President of the Chicago Association of Black Psychologists, and also a consultant with an organization called HELP, Healing, Empowering, and Learning Professionals. My favorite Chicago moment is sort of a composite. When the question was asked, the first thing that comes to mind is the African Fest, the annual Festival of the Arts that happens Labor Day weekend in Washington Park. And I've been going to it since I was a kid. And now I have kids and I take them to it. So my memory is sort of this amalgamation of these moments of time at that festival in the drum circles or in different performances or at the vendors and the food. It's such a beautiful family reunion for me, for the community that I've been growing up in Chicago, but also learning new things and meeting new people. That festival was really, really near and dear to me. I didn't realize how much I needed it until we lost it last year. So I'm looking forward to hopefully next year, maybe this year, but at least by next year.
It's gonna happen.
having the African Fest back in Chicago. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about my favorite Chicago moments. And I would like to ask Alexa James that question also. What's your favorite Chicago memory, Alexa James?
Oh my God, I have so many. So I'm Alexa James. I'm the CEO of NAMI Chicago. I'm so happy to be here. It actually feels really healing to sit among all of you tonight, particularly after today and still what's going on in our country. So for me, I heal in communities. I know that's what we're going to talk about today. So it feels really good to be around people who have inspired change in the city that I love so deeply. NAMI Chicago is a mental health organization. We advocate for change through the voices of those who are directly experiencing this system, this trauma, this pain. We support people and link them to treatment, and it is the privilege of my life. My favorite Chicago memory may feel like a little bit too personal, I wonder, but it's running the Chicago Marathon. I think that the opportunity, first of all, to be around 40,000 people who are able, who are training, who have tenacity to run through our beautiful neighborhoods. I mean, I think that Pilsen is the best, or when you round through Chinatown and you're like, oh God. And then people are like smoking and you're like, what's happening? Like I'm on my like 21st mile and there's like, but the fact that people show up to cheer you on, that's all they want to do is support their neighbor, is where my heart has been so full. So I've run 4 Chicago marathons and I don't know if I'd ever want to run anywhere else, because to me, it just makes my heart happy. So just like you, Dr. Cartman, I hope that we can do this again. I really missed it this fall. And I hope that the city will have this celebration soon again. So Jose, you're up, my friend. What is your favorite Chicago memory? Who are you? Tell us everything.
Great. Well, I actually like that memory too, Alexa, and I always love running past Pilsen and into Chinatown. That's always a good part of the marathon. My name is Jose Rico. I am the executive director of Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation of Greater Chicago, which is a national organization dedicated to racial healing. We are in 19 cities, so we have a national scope in the racial healing work that is led by African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos here in this country, everything from Alaska down to Selma, and then also from LA to New York. And so, you know, what we do here in Chicago is we work with about 300 trained racial healing practitioners to help people to really understand and the roots of systematic racism, both how it's embedded in our bodies, how it's deeply embedded in all of our institutions, and how people who are in positions of power are also perpetuating systematic racism, and really trying to help to uncover that so we could recognize that truth and make the changes that are necessary. So, you know, I grew up here in Chicago. I'm from the Southwest side, and you cannot be a Latino in Chicago and not have good memories of parades. And so every one of my favorite memories have been in parades. My first favorite memory is being, I grew up in Pilsen, so being in 18th Street and seeing the floats from each Mexican states walking down 18th Street in a parade with our traditional indigenous dress, and then also being part and taking my kids to the Bob Billiken parade, and also being able to see the cultural traditions there. So parades for me, and my daughter this year was really upset because we couldn't go to the Puerto Rican parade. So the parades are the most important part for me. So now what I would love to do is really get into this conversation because I think that many of us, you know, as you mentioned, Alexa, we've been really severely impacted by the events of today. But we also know that the events of today are not isolated, right? And so we really want to get deep into the conversation about what racialized trauma is in this country and how it plays out specifically here in Chicago. So I would love to start the conversation. This is a question that's for all of us, is how do you, in your respective organizations and the respective work that you have, how do you define racial healing? And what I could do is I could start it off. And for us, when we talk about racial healing at Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, is really about three components. It's really about one, acknowledging that there has been some harm caused by systematic racism. And oftentimes, that actually seems like a simple thing, but oftentimes is a really hard thing, right? Because we know that, for example, when we talk about police brutality, for many years, police brutality was said by the African-American community, but it was never recognized across the board. So one, we need to acknowledge that harm has been caused. But secondly, we also need to acknowledge how that harm is going to be repaired. And oftentimes it has to do with not just the recognition of someone's human dignity, but there are some real material costs to that harm. And we need some real repair that needs to happen to make up for that harm. And then finally is the healing component. And so how do we sit down face to face and come to terms with the acknowledgement that we are human beings and that our humanity is valued, regardless of what our racial background is. So that's how we at TRHT define racial healing. We'd love to throw it over to you, Alexa. How would you define it? How do y'all think about it now?
Jose, do people say to you all the time that they could just listen to you talk like
No.
this? Really? It's so I think it's a complicated and also very simplified, simple question. And I think it's complicated because at NAMI Chicago, we've always presented ourselves as a mental health organization, specifically serious mental illness. And about a decade ago, maybe a little bit less, we said, why aren't we talking about environmental stressors and systemic racism and policies that have not only injured people, but never actually allowed people to grow? Why aren't we talking about that around wellness? And so our approach has always been around perspective shifting. And as advocates, as a young organization, I mean, we're 40 years old, but our team is young, relatively young. We are selling a product of mental health that people aren't always super interested in buying, because they don't acknowledge that this impacts them. So our work around healing is really about perspective shifting, about acknowledging, about being very fierce and acknowledging that apathy is never a response to inequality, to inequity, to being uncomfortable in a way that you grow, and making sure that people are positioned that they can have uncomfortable conversations that are fulfilling, that they're open to, and that it doesn't cause more trauma and distress. And I think that the word healing is really interesting because I often think that folks think about healing as an opportunity to go back to where they were when they weren't injured. That's not how we think of healing. Healing is a process. It is constant. It's not let's start to heal tomorrow after things shake out in DC. It's this is constant, and it's really about evolving and building resilience, which is, of course, so much of what all of you are doing in your organizations. And remembering that we may never go back to where we were before we were injured, depending on what our trauma was, and that we have to be super patient and full of love when we're acknowledging other people's pain. My pain is laughable compared to what other people have experienced, but I still hold it to be true. And I ask that we honor each other's experience. So for us, it's really based on individual experience, really digging into being uncomfortable and being able to sit in, I won't swear because we're on Facebook, but sit in the ick and learn how to manage that through building resilience. That's how we think about healing. I'm always so interested, of course, to hear from another mental health professional, Dr. Karpman, about how you think about this idea of healing.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate the work that NAMI's doing. As you were talking about the idea of going back to a place before the harm occurred, I kept thinking about the difference between applying that analysis to an individual and versus a collective. So when we talk racial healing, I'm always thinking often about like, what does it mean for a collective to have been harmed? And then what does it mean for us as Black descendants of Africans in this country to go back to a place before we were just surviving, right? And so for me, that healing always takes me back to pre-slavery, to continental, and for us, indigenous goes to another continent. I really appreciate what Jose was talking about when he talks about the beauty of culture in Pilsen, the parades and the food and the dress. And for African Americans, it's difficult for us to recover some of that because part of the harm was removing that culture from our experience. So taking the drums away and our languages away and our dress away. So there's still so much about what it means to create the depravity, the ways in which we see being manifested in, you know, depression and anxiety and violence and suicide and addiction. All the things that we see in mental health now are a result of generations of harm. And so when I think about what it means to go back to that, it has to include reincorporating the memory of those things that were taken away, because they weren't things that just fell out of our pocket. We didn't lose them like a birthday. Like we didn't forget about these things. They were a part of the trauma. They're part of maintaining the systems of oppression. We call it, you know, a racial systemic racism now, but we've always known that America is an expert at that. From the Native people that were here first, every people that they've colonized happened through the removal of their culture, because there's healing in culture. There's medicine embedded in the language and the music and the arts and drum. So there's always an understanding of that. So for me, when I think about what it means to heal that, I start there. It's hard to even think about racial healing. I always put cultural healing in the word. When you ask about racial healing, I'm always thinking about cultural healing. And so, because race by itself, like the very foundation of the concepts, has division in it. It has social political narratives in it. So when you go beyond those biological, social, political markers and get at the culture of a people, we find a lot more commonalities, a lot more power, a lot less like trauma. When you think about just the Black Lives Matter movement, if we define Blackness based on police brutality or what America's done to us, we miss so much. We about to be in February, I'm still going to schools where they start Black History Month with slavery. There's so much shame and defeatedness, and there's so much there's not a desire to connect to those things when you hear you've been losing for centuries. And then you go back to Africa and you hear about AIDS and sickness and war, and so these African Americans have this warring, I don't feel connected to Africa, or I feel embarrassed about Africa. And then there's this American part of my identity that has been harming me the whole time. So it leaves people lost. It leaves people sort of scrambling. So for me, I think the healing has to be, what does it mean to recover for a collective those things that were taken as a part of the generations of harm that created the systems that we perpetuate ourselves? There's a question that came in the chat that I really appreciate. Do communities know what healing looks like? I forgot who asked that in the chat. And I think that's one of the dilemmas of my work in particular. I spend a lot of time South and West Sides trying to integrate cultural healing practices, using spirituality, using music, using art. And I do that for two reasons. One is because I don't think that communities know what healing looks like all the time. I think we've normalized a level of dysfunction and almost celebrate it in some ways. So I find myself trying to give medicine to people that don't realize they're sick sometimes. And so I use the arts and the culture and those fun things as a hook, particularly for men. I work a lot with Black men. And Black men just not, they won't come to a healing circle. They won't come talk about their feelings, but they'll come drum. They'll come do, I don't even call it Qigong. If I frame it like Kung Fu, they might show up, right? If I talk about, we have to trick people into doing these healing kind of things, but I think the cultural practices allows us a way to give a hook to it, but also embedded in that framework is a reincorporation of those things that were taken from us that have those organic healing properties and allow us to connect to other people. So we could have conversations about culture that connect us much easier than we talking about our different racial backgrounds. But we talk about the food we like, or the music we like, or the things we enjoy, right? Our Chicago memories, we find a lot more similarities in those cultural aspects of us. So race by itself, like the essence of it is division and like trauma. And I think there's so much more room in culture that has healing opportunities that I lean more on. That concludes my TED Talk. I've been trying to like give short, succinct answers, but it's so good. Like I love these questions and these conversations. But Saida, I read the bio. I feel like there's a lot of synergy in the things that I'm working on, and with the Black Psychologists Organization, which is the African organization, but also Real Men Charities, where we're doing a lot of arts, culture-based mental health work. When I saw what Organic Oneness was about, a lot of the things that you're working on does just that brings these cultural realities to life and use the medicine in it to bring the communities that otherwise wouldn't see it or appreciate it. Can you share more about what that work looks like and how you define racial healing from that lens?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always so hard going last after you always go brilliant with your answers. And as you were talking, you were going through the checklist of like what I was going to say. So I appreciate that we're all on the same page, because when we're like-minded working towards the same goals, it makes it much easier. So yeah, Obari, we do have a lot in common, and I hope that after this we can co-create a space together
For sure.
to build people's capacity around this issue. And that's something that we do, is that we just work together with other people and put shine a light on what's already being done. We just amplify it. And a lot of what my one friend calls me a community choreographer instead of organizer. Everyone comes with their own talents. I just kind of place things like a dance.
Yeah.
So my answer with how do I define racial healing was in a lot of your answers. I would like to add that when we are talking about healing, we have to diagnose and properly diagnose what the illness is. And if we do that, then we can get to a place of healing. And what's happening is that there's such a denial in America, in Chicago, everywhere globally, of what the illness is. And then when we say racism, then people tend to shy away and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to dig into it. They don't want to understand it because there is this sense of shame. And that's what I think that we really have to heal from, is that shame, because that's what's preventing and being a barrier to our healing. The communities of color, we know what needs to be done. I think in everybody's hearts, we know what needs to be done, and that's to acknowledge that racism is a societal cancer. And I shouldn't just say communities of color, everybody in their heart. And we have to get to a place where, yes, we know the truth, we uncover, we unravel, we bring to a point of disintegration of what our old world ways of being are, to our institutions, how things were built. This country was built on the legacy of slavery, our Constitution, everything. So the fabric of how we function is an us versus them. Is the lighter your skin is, the more benefits and the more privilege you have. And that's just how it's set up. And so until we understand that and we unravel that, we can't get to a place of healing. But I'm hopeful that there are so many of us that are working towards this. For us to get to this place, we have to understand the value of each other, know the interconnectedness. So on my website, there's a quote that says, "We belong to an organic unit, and when one part of the organism suffers, the rest of the body will feel its consequences." And so until we understand how interconnected we are with each other, we're not going to heal. And so each groups of people come with such amazing gifts for society to advance. And because we deny those different groups an opportunity to develop to their fullest potential, the entire world is suffering. And we see that. And we see because of COVID, we see because of the way the world is right now, how interconnected we are and how damaging everything has been. And so when we're able to get everyone to understand the nobility of each human being, of each living thing on Earth, including Earth itself, we're not going to get there, but I'm hopeful. So I'm appreciative of everything that everyone said. That's just my piece from the top of my head.
You all have said so many beautiful things that I've tried to write down, and I know that people are commenting, validating a lot of what you're saying, and thanking you all for a lot of what you're saying too, which is lovely to see. Which is like this idea that I think you all have brought up today, which is really leading with love and empathy. It's interesting when you have this conversation like this. What does healing look like when we're talking about healing from racism? There's so much like love and inclusivity, which you don't often see on the other side, which I actually find to be so beautiful and so full of grace in conversations, particularly with individuals and groups and with collective grief, to join in that space. And I think that, my question is, what do you all think we need, which many of you have touched on, and so maybe you want to add something or be more specific around what do we need to heal from this moment. And what I would offer is summarizing a lot of what I heard, just from like a biological perspective, that in order to heal, we do need medicine. And I just cannot, even with what you said, it was so beautiful. Healing and medicine is embedded in culture, and that's why you've defined it. Mm-hmm. And we know that we know biologically that when we connect to people that are like of our likeness or not, when there's authentic connection because we have empathy for one another, that it changes the way our brain operates, that it doses us, that it reduces trauma, that it enhances resilience. It gives you a place of peace and understanding. And I have talked to many people over the last year in my family where we have broached conversations that should have been had a very long time ago, and I feel shame around it. And it's sickening to me, in fact, some perspectives of people who I've grown up with. But I can listen and I can show up with my values and my integrity and not feel paralyzed. So that empathy for me is not acceptance. It's taking the time to ask people around me to do what I'm asking them to do as well. And it does not always mean healing happens, but it does mean the connection is happening. And through more of that, I think we'll get to what you were talking about, Saida, which is like really this idea that if we all honored each other in a real way, we wouldn't be in this place of chronically harming because we want to retain our power. And when we feel powerless, we behave in ways that are unlike ourselves. So it's this really ugly cycle, and constantly damaging. So Sita, I want to go back to you because I never want you to feel like you're last ever again. So besides loving people more, what would you say to people that right now today that they can do to progress their healing and their community healing?
So what do people need to do to heal at this moment? First, look in the mirror and say, I love you. We need to figure out how to love ourselves the way we are and not the way we're supposed to be. Figure out what the truth is on how we got to this point. When I first saw, and a lot of my work that I do is inspired by the Baha'i faith and by Dr. Joy DeGruy, with a lot of other things in the mix. But those are the two kind of pillars that I stem all our work from. And so we need to be truthful. We need to be truthful with the damage that has been done, understand the damage, you know. So I used to, before I heard Dr. Joy DeGruy, I always had these questions. I always felt like I was wrong. I always felt like I couldn't talk in the room when there were a lot of men. I always felt that I wasn't smart enough because of my Latinx background. I just couldn't find the right answers or the right thing to say, or I didn't say it right, or I said it too. It was always, I was too passionate, I was too irrational, I'm too loud, I move my hands too much. You know, I'm always too. I never fit in. And in order to understand why that is, we have to understand the standard of what we're being held against. So knowing that we're being held up to a European standard, and our standard is just as important, just as valuable, and just as noble. First, that's healing in itself. Saying, okay, I don't have to act like this. And this is that standard, and it works for some for certain situations. But this is how my family acts. This is how I act, and it's okay. And I need to be okay with that. I shouldn't feel stupid. I shouldn't feel like I don't belong. I shouldn't feel the pain that comes along in a classroom or workplace or somewhere where I just am not smart enough. I got my master's, just to be truthful. I got my master's just so I could say I have the letters next to my name, so that when it was a room primarily of white men, I could feel just as smart and I could stand behind that. But my practical experience in the community already taught me what I needed to know. Everything that my parents told me, and my faith tells me, is the same thing I learned in my master's degree. And so, you know, it's understanding that we come to this world perfect and noble, and honoring that. And if somebody makes us feel different from that, having the courage to stand up for what it is that you're contributing. And I think, you know, if we can understand each other's backgrounds, we can understand how it fits in the larger piece of humanity. So that's the very theoretical. The very practical, what we need to do is each individual needs to educate themselves on the true history of this country. At a community level, we need to come together and create spaces where we could learn about each other. On an institutional level, we need to relook at the policies and everything and how things are created, and dismantle a lot of that so that it could fit within how people are and not how they should be. So I know that was a roundabout question, but I I hope it answered what you asked. Should I pick the next person, or are you going to? I'll pick the next person. So Jose, what do you think we need to heal from at this moment?
You know, I think we need to recognize the violence, the death, the over policing, the conditions that put our people in poverty. We are basically in a situation that we have been for many decades, but you know, we all know that this last year we've seen one of the most violent years. Normally, in a normal year, We have 3,200 Black Chicagoans that die unnecessarily from that don't need to die every year because of the health disparities in the city of Chicago. That number has been risen. Normally, we have Black Chicagoans and Latinos who money gets redistributed from themselves in neighborhoods like Roseland and Little Village and go to banks and corporations here in downtown because of the property taxes or the sales taxes or the regressive income tax that we have right now. So we have wealth extracted from our communities that impoverish us. And then normally we see that the opportunities that we have are minimal to none, whether it's being able to go to a school that is fully resourced or being able to get a job that will be able to pay a family to survive in the city of Chicago. And I think you said something that's really important is we don't need to do much investigating around what needs to change. I mean, we see activists in the city of Chicago every day telling our political leaders and our corporate leaders what needs to change. I think that the harm that is being caused in our community is very intentional. And I think it's two very simple reasons. One is those corporate leaders and those civic leaders have a really hard time valuing our humanity. I think there is a barrier for that. And two, that the economic structure that currently exists profits off of our misery. And it's very hard to shift that profit margin for us to allow us to be connected and allow us to be able to see each other as human beings, because it is thought that one group will lose something. And we see that playing out today in the Capitol, where people are storming the Capitol because they think they're going to lose their country or they're going to lose something. And I think that that's the harm that we need to heal from at this moment. And I'm hoping, right, that every time that we do something at the grassroots level, that's where we're going to change things. But at the end of the day, we know that we also need to name who's causing that harm and what are the policies that are causing that harm, because that is the truth that we need to make sure we name, and that the healing is not an interpersonal exercise, but it's also an institutional and a systematic reckoning that needs to happen.
Yeah, and can I just add to that really quickly that all three need to align with the same mindset: the individual, the community, and institution. Because if that doesn't happen, then there's a barrier stopping the flow. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't see very much happening at the institutional and then the systematic. I actually see more
changing their hearts.
Yeah.
They're not doing the work they need to in order to unravel this. They're stopping it. Yeah.
I see more retrenching to like what we saw today in DC. So we need to make sure that those institutional efforts are sustained and they're broad and they actually have some resources to be able to make that happen. What do you think, Abari? Are we talking crazy?
Not that crazy. No, I love it. I agree. I'm struggling with the alignment of the institutions and the communities and the families. I feel like especially today is a perfect reminder of like my own disillusionment about them changing their minds, them coming around eventually to love. I don't know if that's going to happen in our lifetime. I think that we need to do what we can to defend ourselves. But like, I'm a little bit over trying to convince someone that my life matters, because just the very argument feels like a waste of time. Like, because maybe I'll get you to agree or pretend like you agree. But I don't know that has served us in ways that are sustainable. So I think a lot more about the alignment between self, community, family, nature, God. I feel like there are other alignments that if we focus our attention on, we could build bases of power that could put us in position to really be able to negotiate in a different way. So for me, when I think about the day to day, what does healing look like right now? I do think there needs to be committees of folks that are focused on policies, that are banging against the system, that are trying to challenge those places. In the meantime, I think that if everyone else was just more attentive to what needs to happen in our house, on our block, if we just went back to some more simple things like getting to know our neighbors, taking care of our children, educating ourselves. Like I went to school similar to SIDA to go to get a whole PhD just so I could be in rooms with white people and not be dismissed. The only reason I did it. But more than I learned everything in that school that I already knew from community, in my experience, I had to unlearn some of the things that I learned in school in order to be able to come back out and do the work. I think there's the training facilities are designed and are in bed with the power systems as they are. And universities are better at like using language to make themselves appear like they're not a part of the power systems, but they are, just like everything else. And so there are ways in which we just have to go back to self, to community, to family, to do really simple things like be kind and more compassionate to each other. And really like literally just get to know your neighbors. Like simple things like if I wanted to study more things around understanding the true history of America or Black history or whatever it is, I think that, I have the capacity to create a book club on my block with my cousins. I could teach, if I'm saying that the schools are broken, I've got a problem with CPS or whoever it is, like I have the power to teach myself and teach my children. And I think this last year really helped me see that. COVID really helped see what does it mean for the system to not be to trust the system for real. They're trying to figure things out as they go along. What does that mean for us as communities to have to do that for ourselves? What does it mean for the fathers to have to come together to figure out how to pool our resources? What does it mean for the children to have to figure out how to, do for self? Like I think that is a part of the healing paradigm that doesn't always feel good, and I think the healing won't always feel good at first. I've been getting into yoga the last year. I do this Black male do yoga sessions, free session out of Corey, and I wasn't into yoga at first. But like now that I'm doing it, I can appreciate that part of the process is putting myself in positions like literal poses of my body that are uncomfortable. And that is a part of the healing process. Because after I get into it, I breathe through it, I find flexibility in it. I realize I can use my mind to not overtake my body, but to have a better alignment with the difficult positions that I put myself in. And that it does not always feel good, but it makes me stronger. And I think the healing has to be like that. I think that there's a place where we have to do healing that isn't just about like the self-care movement where we're getting pedicures and like massages. I think the part of it is accountability, is discipline, is study, it's hard work, and it feels good on the other end of it. But in the middle of it, I think that a lot of it won't actually be appealing to a lot of people, which is why we don't do it. I think it's just we want to go to a therapist and we want them to solve our problems and we want to go get pills. Like we have easy fixes that we desire, but I think that what we really need is to organize and to like reconnect to our families, like to have hard conversations about being in relationships with people. Like, all this stuff is hard to do, and I'm just over waiting for the grant or for somebody to be elected or for the policy to shift. I don't think we have time for that. I think that the need to resolve is too urgent. That we really need to find out how this is our first time the four of us being in conversation. We're gonna lose like that. There's no way that if the healers don't know each other, but the powers that be are in meetings all the time, like we're gonna lose. And so I think it's really just we have to be more organized. We have to collaborate better. It took collaboration to make this so harmful. And it's gonna take collaboration for it to at least stay at minimum like they're surviving, but we're trying to thrive and like build, and we gotta do better. And again, like that's us. Like the four of us have to make a commitment to make sure we meet again, that we have one-on-ones, that we sit down and talk about our visions. We have to do that. Whether or not the folks that stage the coup care or not, whether or not they change their minds or not, whether or not the corporations decide to give a little or not, we have to do that. And that's, for me, is what the first step of the healing has to mean is ownership, agency, and responsibility for the things that we can do, while the people that are doing what they can do will always, there will always be people that are trying to, and that are invested in harm. Like that'll never go away. The people that are invested in healing, I think, have to be more powerful, more organized, and more serious about that kind of work. So I mean, but I think that, you know, I think that leads us to the next question. Like, what is the both and? What is the dual role? How do you heal while being harmed? Are we talking about taking breaks? Are we talking about leaving the country? Like, how do we in this place make some sense of the fact that we all claim to be Americans and are tax-paying citizens and got IDs and social security numbers, but like we invest, like my very name, I never forget that my name is a badge of like trauma from the enemy of my ancestors. And like our everyday, we own the technologies, the cell phones, like we are invested in this same system that is eating us alive. How do we do that as healers? How do we make space within a world where we have to still, you know, feed our children and pay rent, and like we're propping up these same systems that are doing us harm? How have y'all figured that balance out to do things that you feel like are adding value while also being rooted in these exact same systems that are causing harm? Yeah, anybody got any formulas for that? I'll start with Alexa. She's the last person. As you know, and you in big position, like you at the top of a head of a big organization. So like you have to think about money, you have to think about foundation, you have to play these games, but the communities that I know you care about, because I see y'all in them, are being harmed by these same institutions. Like, how do you try to balance it?
Well, I appreciate you calling that out, actually, because I think that the most important thing to do ever is transparency, but also particularly when you're in a position of privilege. What I really like about the work, why I feel so comfortable in this space, is because we will never be subservient. And if we are, it's time for new leadership, and we have failed our promise to community. Like, to say that we can show up for people, because to answer part of that question, like in order to show up, in order to heal during trauma, in order to heal, you should be really well. Like, we don't have the luxury anymore of like being like, I'm like, my self-care is fluffy and pedicures. It's like not what it is. It's really hard, it's really painful, it's ugly, it's messy, it's gratitude. I need to be able to say, for example, in my consulting work with the police department, when I stand up in front of leadership there and say, I decided to not be paid through the city on purpose because I need to think about the investment of this work and providing healing to you all in the same way that we are providing healing to those that you've injured from a organizational perspective. And it's a harder hustle.
Yeah.
But that's that's like how I think that we need to lead. And I have been called out a lot. I was called out personally after George Floyd by a lot of my staff. Like, where's our anti-racist statement? Why aren't we having this conversation in a bigger way? Like, your statement on social media isn't enough. So part of it is allowing yourself to be criticized all the time. It's so good. It's so right. And having enough strength to own it without leading with your ego. No matter who you are in whatever position, if you're leading with your ego, you are in so much grief and in so much like acuity that you can't be a healer to somebody else. Love is showing up when you hurt, but knowing enough that like that's our responsibility. And so how do we heal during pain? You decide what community you're going to show up for and where you feel safe doing that, and who's going to hold you accountable, and what those honest conversations look like. Relationships are not fluffy. They're not supposed to be. Relationships are supposed to call you out and also support you when you're in your like toughest moment. And whether it's your clinician or your neighbor, like you said, you know, where is your community, your collective community healing? Because community healing is very different than individual healing. It's a different approach, it's a different framework, it's different best practice strategy. But for me, my thought is we have to make a decision. Are you going to numb and manage? Because that's what we do. We eat, we drink, we cheat, we spend, we whatever, we social media all day. Are we going to numb and manage and distract? Are we going to move to Canada? Or are we going to be like, this is where we sit, and am I going to grind my heels in and sit in it and face those hard truths and know that there's something on the other side, and make sure that there are people around you to show you a little bit of that light. Part of what I think is so painful and what makes people feel like they can't move forward is a real loss of hope. And I get it. I understand that there are individuals and communities who just like do not get a break ever, who've never had a break, who've never had a fair shot. How do you find hope in that? How do you go to bed at night and wake up in the morning finding gratitude and you're like, I can't feed my kids and my gas is off? And how do we show up in those spaces when, you know, when we say like that nobody's holding your hand through your journey, that hope is lost and gone. And that's when we're going to see mental health conditions skyrocket. This is why we are seeing suicides increase dramatically in the Black and Brown community, particularly among men. This is hopelessness. This is the culmination of people being shut out and misunderstood and not celebrating grief and change and growth. I don't know, makes me sweat though, thinking about it, right? Because you like, when you talk like that, you're like, okay, what did I do today that I didn't show up? Where did I avoid today? Where did I distract today? So, Jose, what do you think?
No, I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, the community that I'm from and that I belong to, which many of us are not documented and do not speak English and have to work, you know, 2 jobs to be able to put food on the table. The space to be able to do the healing is it's not there, frankly. And what we end up doing when we work with this community is we start by going into what our ancestral knowledge is, right? And many times, because of white supremacy, a lot of that ancestral knowledge gets erased. But oftentimes in our cultural practices, it exists. And so we go into what are some of the things practices that we do, like, for example, teas and herbs, rituals that we are part of that we could tap into to then get into the conversations about how you're feeling, how is this connected to your trauma. We see a lot of trauma of people in the Latino community because of the separation that when people came to Chicago, what they left behind, who they are now, and what they thought life was going to be here. Tremendous amount of trauma there that they have not been able to access or really get into because of the oppressive conditions they face here. And if they're undocumented, will not be able to get any of the services that folks would ordinarily be eligible to. So one of the things that we do is we really use our own ancestral knowledge to try to access that. But the other part that we're finding that's super, super important because of the history of Chicago is that Chicago, the recent history of Chicago, this is once the Native Americans were pushed out of Chicago and their lands were taken away, is that Chicago became a segregated city. So one of the things that I believe stops us from healing as a city is the segregation that exists in Chicago. And what Obari mentioned earlier, if we cannot collaborate and work together and understand where our ancestral knowledge and our strengths are, we're never going to heal as a city. And until we recognize that and put a lot of energy in making those connections amongst ourselves as healers and as communities that have been oppressed, then we're not going to be able to heal as a city. And I think the way I look at it is those are 2 really important things, is going into the healing capacities that already exist in us because they're there, but then how do we connect with each other? Because if we maintain that separation and that segregation, our city's gonna forever.
True.
Yeah, yeah, and just to kind of close this out, you were touching upon, not only can we, how do you heal as a community through this, but then how does Chicago need to heal, and what kind of things do we need to recognize? And I don't know if you all know, but in 1821, we're coming up on the 200-year anniversary, is when the first treaty was made to start moving the natives going west. And so if you want to jump on board with what Organic Oneness is doing to kind of unravel that, I welcome anyone to start investigating. So just, I guess, wrapping us up, what do you see Chicago, what do we need to do? What is it? For me, pray. Like at this moment in time, we need to call on our ancestors, on the higher being. We need to look at every source of power. We need to really dig deep and not think that these things are taboo. And Obari, I think that you touched upon it a little bit, is like, you sound like you're in the communities. You don't want to try to convince other people. You don't want to, and that's beautiful. That is your lane, and I encourage everybody to find their lane. What is it that you do that draws your heart and that you feel empowered to do, and do it. If you don't want to go in the marches, but you are bringing people together in the neighborhood, great. If you're doing that and you don't want to talk to the elected officials, that's fine. But there are other people that long for that. They feel it is their passion. And so if we can all connect on what the end goal is and have this roadmap and be more organized, Dr. King said, those who love peace must organize as those who must organize as well as those who love war. And so our budgets, our resources, everything, the people, what are the assets? How do we put that together in Chicago? And then how do we lead a roadmap for other cities? There's this one thing that I'm scared. Did Candace come back? Candace?
She wants us to do the closeout question.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that was the closeout question. Oh, the closeout. That's you, Jose.
Well, yeah. So I was actually gonna combine it where if you were going to do a closeout question about what Chicago needs to see in the name of your favorite song. So it has to be the name of a song or an album of what Chicago needs to see for real healing to happen. What would that be? And I will start it off to give you this is going to be my favorite song right now anyway. It just happened to fit into the theme. But my favorite song right now that I play as my anthem is a song by Khalid B, Frida Watutu, which is about being able to free your mind and freeing your imagination, because that is the only way we're going to be free as people. Khalid B is African descent, African immigrant to Chicago, and talks about the social justice movement that's happening here in Chicago. Frida Watutu, check it out. That's my song.
That's a really hard task to combine those things. It's impossible. I will try anyway. So I've been listening a lot to his album. It's like an EP. The artist is named Freddie Oso. She's from Chicago. Her album is called The First People, and she incorporates like indigenous Orisha music and that kind of stuff. So I think that supporting local artists and finding music that heals and putting money there, I think is one of the things that we all need to do better. We got 6 seconds. Quickly, Alexa, Saida, you have a song.
This is very difficult because I thought we were just supposed to be picking a song that felt Chicago to us. And now I'm going to sound, it's not going to be in line or on theme, but I'm just going to be honest here. I was picking Homecoming by Kanye because Kanye is such a complicated person. But he's from Chicago, and like that song, or like Glory Common, I was trying to like bring, but I don't know.
Oh my God.
Oh, I really need more time. Candace, you have to bring me back. Or we should make a playlist of all of our favorite songs and send it out.
I like it.
Well, I do want to add mine. So a couple of friends of mine put together a song specifically about Chicago and the spiritual significance of it, and it's the heart of America. And whatever efforts are initiated here will flow through the rest of the nation. And so I highly recommend looking that up on YouTube. It's Chicago. I think it's on Baha'i.blog. But it's really beautiful. It talks about how we're the heart of America.
I just want to call out Vanessa, who, by the way, has been fabulous. I'm watching your chat, Vanessa. And
Hey,
Donny
Vanessa.
Hathaway has such a special place in my heart. And I thought that song too. So I'm glad that you offered that. We'll add it to the playlist.
Great,
Love Donny
great.
Hathaway.
Well, great, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Hope to see you in the next session that's coming up soon.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Join us next Wednesday, January 13th at 5:30 p.m. Central Time, when we'll have a candid conversation with the neighbors.